Evictions are awful for everyone. It's also pretty intimidating for everyone involved, including the landlord. Being landlords ourselves who've gone through the eviction process before, we can tell you from experience that even though it's definitely not something to take lightly, it's important to remember that it's just part of the job, right? So do your best if possible to just remove your personal feelings at this point, and remember that it's a formal and legal process that is really meant to protect everybody that's involved. All right, so but before we dive into it all, let's make a few disclosures here. We are not lawyers, right? So just please go speak with a professional before you actually take action here. And that brings us to the next point. Be absolutely sure that you are taking lawful action, right? So you might think it's easier to take matters into your own hands right now, but in most states, it's entirely illegal to perform what's called a self-help eviction, right? So that basically means don't change the locks. Do not turn off the utilities. Don't harass anyone. Don't mess with their belongings or touch any of their belongings. And definitely don't attempt to remove them from the property yourself. The eviction process, it's a legal procedure to lawfully and sometimes forcefully remove a tenant from a property. So just simply follow your state-specific eviction process to prevent any tenant lawyer lawsuits, right? With that groundwork laid, let's get into the valid reasons for evicting a tenant in the first place. Creating a safety hazard on the property, like drugs or even reckless behavior that's occurring. Breaching the lease or rent agreement. Perhaps that's unapproved pets. Another thing would be just Airbnb your home without permission, right? If that's not something that's allowable within your rent or lease agreement. Causing damage to the rental, breaking municipal or HOA ordinances, right? So things like noisiness or dealing cars from your front yard. And then lastly, and this one's the obvious one, is just failing to pay rent on time. And this one typically ends up being the most common. As you'll probably notice here, there's so many reasons why evicting a tenant might be warranted. But make sure that your reasons are legally supported in your state and rental agreement. So next, remember that you need documented support for your eviction. The last thing anybody wants is to get into a he said, she said battle right in front of a court. Take pictures, save your receipts, and even just notate conversations as they happen if it looks like there's something that's moving towards a sour turn. Now we can discuss how to actually start an eviction. So to get started, you'll need to provide a formal eviction notice that complies with your local laws, which will determine how many days notice you need to provide to the tenants. So this notice is basically an ultimatum, right? Like something that tells them how to cure the problem and also what's going to happen if they don't cure that problem. So how you deliver this notice and under what circumstances can be important. So check your local laws on that one. At this point, the clock is ticking and the decision-making process is now theirs. Do they fix the problem or do they proceed down the rest of that eviction process, right? If they do not cure the issue during this period of time, then you will now file for eviction. So filing for eviction will generate a date for formal eviction hearing, right? And so at the eviction hearing, you're going to want to come prepared. And some of the things that you're going to want to bring are your lease agreement, if there is one, a copy of the eviction notice, proof of when they received the notice, record of all payments made, record of all communication, if possible. And then, of course, is just anything else that helps you validate your eviction decision, like proof of a bounced check or whatever else that it may be. If the court rules in your favor, there's going to be a court order for the tenant to now vacate the property in a set amount of days. And typically that's anywhere from 2 to 10 days, right? Depending on your state. If they have not left the property by the date on that court order, then a writ of possession will typically be granted, which will mean someone from your local sheriff's department will need to come over and physically remove the tenant from the property fast and efficiently. And thankfully that happens in a pretty short period of time. Now with the eviction behind you, you'll need to address the damages resulting from that tenant. So either during the eviction or afterward in a local small claims court, landlords will then file a claim to recoup the funds or unpaid rents, if applicable, or damages to the property, right? After a resulting judgment from there, the court can then garnish wages, private debt collector, or other means to recoup any unpaid rents. Look, no one ever wants to evict a tenant or be evicted themselves, right? God forbid. But once you've gone through the process the first time, you can now take steps to reducing the likelihood of that happening again in the future. Better background checks, checking references, maybe a little bit more thoroughly, but it is not something fully under your control. So you can never fully remove the chance of having to go through an eviction.